Okay, take two, we are live. So funny, I literally just talked for several minutes and we weren't live. So welcome to the world of someone who's technologically inept, but who's passionate about current day issues. And so thank you for bearing with us as we are all quarantined and we're in different parts of the world joining you by way of the internet. Thank you to our worldwide family for joining us. We know that we have people who are listening into the conversation from literally all around the world. And it makes us feel so much more connected to know that we have a conversation that's happening in Salt Lake City, Utah, or Los Angeles, California, or Brooklyn, New York, or Johannesburg, South Africa. And it's relevant to all of us because we're all members of the human family. Everyone taking part in tonight's discussion is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so a lot of that experience will be reflected in these conversations. However, one genuine problem I have with conversations within spiritual or religious traditions is that they often tend to be exclusive. And I want this conversation to be anything but. We have a worldwide problem of race, racial tension, misunderstanding, human disconnection. And this is a problem that involves all of us, every member of the human family. And so you're welcomed here, your opinion counts, and we care about you, whether you are active, inactive, atheist, Jewish, Muslim, Baptist, undecided, agnostic. A lot of the issues that are specific to the LDS Church and race and its historic context will be things that we will discuss here, but it's really a global conversation. And so for those who didn't join us back last time, to give you a little bit of backstory, I decided to pull together some friends who were church members who all had kind of interesting, and I would say maybe atypical or non-mainstream experiences within the LDS Church. And I wanted us to talk about race in light of the current racial tensions, in light of the protests happening worldwide, in light of what we all saw with George Floyd being choked to death in broad daylight while in police custody, and all of the fallout that occurred since that point. There's been a lot of disinformation. That's the topic of tonight's conversation, disinformation, and how people in a spiritual community react to that. And sort of what are our obligations as it relates to, many of us are Christian. We live in a Christian majority country in the United States, even though this is a global conversation. And yet I often see sort of a conflict between Christian ideals and what's played out, especially in the political sphere. These are not designed to be political conversations. Instead, they're designed to be conversations that transcend politics. Race affects every one of our lives, whether we're political or not. And so I think all too often, too, there's divisiveness in the political sphere. And I really hope to transcend that and to have conversations that are sincere, that are from the heart, that are uncomfortable. And we're even going to discuss and unpack ugly topics at times, but from a place of, or from an intention, I should say, my intention, Marvin's intention when we connected and decided to host these conversations was to figure out a way to build bridges and not walls. And so that really is the intention of this conversation, which all too often leaves people polarized on different sides of the aisle, or whites against blacks, or against browns, or Asians, and we are brothers and sisters living on one planet together. And so I think the more that we can talk about our experiences as brothers and sisters, and the more that we can come together like we are, for those of us who are Christian and who care about those ideals, I think we have a charge to start acting like it. That said, let me stop hogging the screen time and introduce tonight's panelists. First, we have Marvin Perkins. You might know him from Blacks in the Scriptures. He's been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 30 years. He's been doing work to uncover the truth about the role of Black people in the Scriptures, racism, and a lot of these issues for more than 20 years. He's also co-founder of the B1 Initiative. You can find more about that at, let me make sure I get it right, Marvin, the b1project.org. Welcome, Marvin. Thanks for being
here. Good evening. How are you? Glad to be here again.
I'm good. How are you?
Tremendous. Always beautiful in LA.
LA. Okay, rub it in, Marvin, for the rest of the world. He's
right.
LA. Next, let me introduce Patrick. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Candy.
Patrick has been, how long have you been a member of the church?
Since 1986.
Since 1986, Patrick was also the first Black missionary in the state of Utah to complete a mission, as far as we know. He lives in the Phoenix, Arizona area and has a company called Listing Ladder. And please help me welcome Patrick McGinley.
Hello.
Hello. Next, we have Josh Black. Josh Black was also born a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's an alumnus, I believe I'm saying that right. He's alumni, but an alumnus of Caltech in Pasadena, California. He's also the father of a mixed race child and an ally. Thanks for being with us tonight, Josh.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right in. When it comes to disinformation, I was kind of inspired to have a discussion about this because in the wake of the Ahmaud Arbery killing, then I think came Breonna Taylor, but I'm not sure about the exact timelines, but all of these things happened in the first part of this year. So for Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, there were 3 incidents in a row that really seemed to kind of make the pot boil over. There have been other ones, Rashard Brooks. There's another young man whose name escapes me right now, but I think most of you probably know who I'm talking about. He was a young Black man who was also killed in police custody. I believe that he was described as an introvert. And so probably not, he might be on the spectrum, not readily able to express himself well. He also was killed. There have been a rash of these events that have caused worldwide protests, riots, outrage. And then there's been a lot of chatter in the online hemisphere, and there's been a lot of disinformation. There are opinions about this on all different sides of the political spectrum. But I really want to kind of drill down into what is true and why there's such a desire, a motivation to spread disinformation. And you can't talk about the racial climate in this country right now or the topic of disinformation without bringing up some very interesting and controversial voices like Candace Owens. So I wanted to unpack some of the things that she said because she's been invited to the White House. She is a person who has millions of views on her social media platform, on videos that she released in response to the George Floyd killing. She also had a bunch of tweets that went viral about the Ahmaud Arbery killing. And the reason that I was inspired to talk about this is, so as I mentioned, I'm a member of the LDS faith, and I live in Utah currently. Utah is a state that is less than 2% Black. And so as a Black female, I am sort of a double minority, so to speak. And it's really an interesting experience to live in Utah and to be a member of the LDS Church, both as a Black woman. And what I've noticed is there's a difference in the reception of things that I post in my social media regarding race than things that other friends have posted. So for instance, I could share the identical post that a Black friend shares, and she will share it, who's not a member of the church, and she'll get lots of support or lots of kind of constructive dialogue. And I noticed a phenomenon where when I would share things about race, everything from talking about when Rush Limbaugh was awarded the Medal of Freedom alongside people like Rosa Parks and others who have received it, who are really considered historically to be quite like dignitaries. And so when someone like Rush Limbaugh receives it, it's controversial. But the reception, when I would talk about this, I noticed was quite different than other Black friends who have diverse makeups of the people in their timelines. But I noticed in the LDS sphere, there seems to be, how do I say it? People are quite vocal about their disagreement on matters of race or their inability to listen to the voices and experiences of Black people. There seems to be quite a charge or quite a motivation to want to offset cries for equality or justice or talk about systemic racism in the world when you are LDS and you're talking about these things, versus when you are not a member of the church and you're sharing, again, the identical posts. I can share them and I can look at the reaction of my timeline versus other people. So this for me has been kind of frustrating, and I've been thinking of the best way to address the fact that not only are we in a church where we are, in this country at least, very, very much in the minority, but there's also just a lack of diversity of thought and of maybe even really connection. So because multiple people who are white members of the church shared Candace Owens' video and her reaction with me, I found it to be quite upsetting, but I wanted to dig further into what that dynamic is about. So first, let me share with you a little portion of her video clip just to frame what we're talking about. And then I'd like to unpack the dynamic that goes on nationwide and church-wide when it comes to discussions of race. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. And here we go.
Some Black conservatives as some token of people wanting you to believe that this is the only way you can be Black, is you have to say this was wrong and that this, this person was amazing. I won't do that. George Floyd was not an amazing person. And as soon as this video hit the internet, I did just basic searches. Everyone jumped on it and was looking at the police officer, and everyone agrees that the police officer was wrong and the police officer has been arrested. So that is not the reason I'm not discussing that, is because that is not something that has been misconstrued in the media. He has been turned into the devil that he is, and there is no reason for us to harp on that any longer, because white Americans are not uplifting Derek Chauvin as a victim or pretending that he's an amazing human being. But George Floyd is being uplifted as an amazing human being. For those of you who have not yet seen the clips and did not pursue or wait for more clips to come out, first and foremost, George Floyd at the time of his arrest was high on fentanyl and he was high on methamphetamine. This came back in both of his autopsy reports. If you pursue the 911 transcript, you can see the person describing somebody who is out of their mind high, which is what made the person fearful, like cocaine or it's white. It's a white baggie that he drops onto the floor that you can to this moment, and why I refuse to accept the narrative that this person is a martyr or should be lifted up in the Black community, and that we should be buying t-shirts with his name on it. Okay. So here we have, first and foremost, let's start from the bottom of his record. And by the way, I am not saying that if you have a record, you don't deserve a second chance. I think people.
Okay. So back to me. So that's just a little bit of the clip. It gives you kind of the general sense of what she's talking about. Her argument is that the Black race is unique in its ability to celebrate the lowest common denominator of society and in its ability to place criminals, as she has coined George Floyd, to place criminals as heroes. Would anyone like to respond to that before I do?
Sure, I'll tackle that.
Okay.
What does it matter if he was a criminal? What does it matter what his rap sheet was, or what does it matter even if he was high or on drugs? And she mentions in that video at some point that there was some substance that had fallen out of his pocket onto the sidewalk or something like that. None of that to me is even relevant. The whole point of the movement and the whole point of the reason why people are getting so frustrated and so upset about what happened was, here was a person who was alleged to have been trying to pass a $20 counterfeit bill. And even if that were true, that's not a capital offense. And you don't have the right as a police officer to kill people just because, for any reason at all, actually, unless they're trying to kill you in the moment. And so the person was in handcuffs, the person was restrained, was begging for his life, was pleading for his life, kept saying over and over that he couldn't breathe. And that is really the only thing that matters. The fact that he has a history, she had mentioned something about she's okay with giving second chances, but not 7th, 8th, and 9th chances. That doesn't even make sense. It doesn't matter what your rap sheet is. It doesn't matter how many crimes you've committed. You still have to go through the process. You still have to go through the judicial system. And none of the things that he did do, among the things that she mentioned, were worthy of being killed.
Yeah, and I will add to that by saying, so she went down his rap sheet of past crimes, the most recent of which I believe was in 2005, so 15 years ago, something that he had already served time for and gotten out. And she also said in that video, and I quote, that Black people are the ones to celebrate criminals who get killed in the commission of a crime. Sorry, he got killed in police custody. He didn't get killed while he was committing a crime. So that's a classic example of disinformation and how people will twist a narrative to fit their agenda rather than dealing with the actual truth. We all know, we all saw he was handcuffed. He was not in the commission of the crime. He was begging for water and his mother, and he was begging to be able to breathe when he was killed. Marvin, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I appreciate both your comments in the video too. First, I want to say one of the things, she's a beautiful African-American woman who is very intelligent and very articulate. And so there are going to be a lot of people on either sides of the argument that will recognize that. But here are the issues. And it's almost even a little more difficult to navigate through it when you have someone who is so intelligent, who is so articulate, and very quick of speech as well. And she doesn't lack for anything. She's ready to go. She talked about George Floyd and his legal incidents. He had 9. The police officer that killed him had over 20. And so where's the focus there? Secondly, she blended a couple of things in, saying everybody in the African-American community is crying, and basically if you're going to be African-American, you have to say that it was wrong, yes, and that George Floyd was this amazing person. Nobody said George Floyd was an amazing person. We said George Floyd was a human being who did not deserve to die in the street with police officers, a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds with 3 other officers standing there doing nothing while the public sat around. And so this part of this disinformation is mixing fact with fiction. And so the fact is, yeah, we all believe that it was wrong. I'm not sure I've heard anybody say that it wasn't wrong. But she's throwing in there that we say that he's an amazing person. That's not the case at all. But I think the thing that troubles me most here is the lack of humanity and the lack of compassion. A man died, his family is affected, and you're going down his rap sheet when an officer who had more infractions than he did blatantly killed him in front of all of America.
I appreciate that as well. And as being a member of a party, she's currently, I think she said she's unaffiliated, but she's very pro-Trump. So, right, and she's very anti-Democrat. So she is often the mouthpiece of the Republican Party. And as such, they tend to have certain tenets that they put forward as important themes in what they are trying to accomplish. One of them is family values, Christian values. It's sort of shocking to me that you could have a platform that encourages Christian values, and yet one of the most basic fundamental values that Christ taught was whatsoever you do to the least of my brethren, that you do unto me. And in his famous story where he said to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he who has not sinned cast the first stone. He made the point, she's guilty, she did it, yeah. And you're right, we should stone her, and you cast the first stone, whoever you are who hasn't sinned. So this is completely contrary to Christian thought, or what is supposed to be the nomenclature of a Christian society. That's a little difficult for me. I will also say that I've noticed that she employs, there's a concept in argumentation and debate called logical fallacy. And one type of logical fallacy is a straw man argument. So it's very frustrating to me when I see someone putting forth a straw man argument as if to win an argument when it's a complete logical fallacy in the first place. No one in the Black race, no one in the Black Lives Matter movement, no one who's calling for equal justice. I haven't heard one person say, we are celebrating the life that George Floyd lived, as we're celebrating criminals. No one, so we never put forth that argument. She's arguing against something that no one postulated in the first place. Logical fallacy. But what we are saying is we see George Floyd's humanity. He's symbolic of 400 plus years of oppression. He's symbolic of a lack of empathy for Black people in this country, and for people of color, and for the disabled, and for many people who are the underdog. And for humanity, there's an absence of, like what you said, compassion and humanity here that's troubling to me. And so he was symbolic, I think, of all people who have ever felt displaced or mistreated or at the mercy of a system that's much more powerful than they are. And so I wonder how people who claim to be they're passionate followers of Christ or of other religious traditions, Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, what have you, how can people normalize really divisive language and normalize being so bitter towards each other and so lacking in compassion? And again, I feel like George Floyd was a symbol of humanity being eroded, and that's why people are looking at him as a martyr. Not that anyone was saying that criminal activity is okay, nor is that even relevant. By the way, one of the bedrocks of the United States criminal justice system, and one of the ideals this country was founded upon, is the 14th, is found in the, I think the 4th and the 15th rather amendment, the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. So to talk about this person and even call him a criminal and say all of these things, it's just disheartening to me. I have a question, and Josh, this question is for you, since you haven't spoken yet. I'm curious why there's such a charge to distract the conversation of social justice, of equal justice, with distractions like this, especially within the LDS community, but nationwide. Clearly it happens outside of the church as well as in. Why do you think so many people feel a need and a drive to distract a conversation like the one that Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement at least is trying to promote, with voices like a Candace Owens and with people who are criticizing the criminal element and a lot of the challenges that really do exist amongst the Black community? What do you say to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. As we were watching the clip, it reminded me of an experience that my son shared with me recently. He had seen a magician perform, and he was very excited. And one of the foundations of successfully performing magic is the ability to use distraction effectively. And as I watched that clip, Candace Owens, that's exactly what it was. And so rather than focusing on the things that matter, it's effective to quickly whisk this discussion away to things that don't matter, but that feel like they might matter. Okay, again, at the time, his rap sheet doesn't matter. How he was treated by the police, it should be based only on the information that they had available at the time, and it wasn't right. Okay, and so it's not more complicated than that. If you want to talk about George Floyd on your own time and stuff that happened in his life before, that's fine, but it's not at all relevant to the crime that took place, and the crime was his life being taken for no reason. Okay, and so it's that sleight of hand, it's that distraction that is a very, very effective tool that she uses, Candace Owens, and is being used by other people all the time to be able to sideline some of these important conversations. And that's what we're trying to do tonight, is to bring it back on track. To the question that you asked, why is this information so readily absorbed and then shared back in this community? I personally think, and this is just my thought on it, it's just uncomfortable for people to sit with the idea that this is a real problem. And so it's much easier to just reach out and grab whatever convenient soundbite will help it quickly go away. And if it is a problem, then there's something that needs to be done about it. It's a real deal. It is a problem, but in the mind of the person who's hearing this. And so it's just so much easier to make the problem go away. I think as human beings, we're inherently extremely focused on our own lives and our own lives only. And it takes something extraordinary to help us look beyond ourselves. And so if this is not an issue that's affecting you in your own life, living here in Utah or wherever, it's just easier to make it go away than to grapple with the reality that this problem is real, it exists, and it's a big deal.
But what about people who are proactively trying to counter things that Black people and other people in the fight for social justice are saying? Because it's one thing to want to look away because it's inconvenient and it doesn't affect you. And I do think that that's a symptom of the human condition. But I also see an active campaign, if you will, to dismantle any conversations that are trying to forward rights for Black people, greater accountability for police, new laws being passed to protect people from hate crimes, this kind of a thing. Why do you think there's such an active resistance or campaign in the opposite direction? And not, obviously you don't speak for all white people as the one Caucasian member of our panel, but if you can offer some insight into why that might be, since you grew up in Boise, Idaho, a place that's very racially homogenous. And so I'm sure you've grown up around a lot of people that you wouldn't necessarily see as racist, but these events and the tensions that we're feeling now, I think have exposed a lot of racial insensitivity. What is that about, Josh? What do you think?
Yeah, well, similar question came up last week, and my answer was fear. Fear that you're just afraid to be vulnerable, to have the conversation, to be open to the idea that there's a problem. One thing that I see is that there's kind of two different responses, which you both pointed out. One is to run away and avoid the conversation, maybe throw out a video clip on your way out the door. And the other is to respond very aggressively. And to me, that's fight or flight, really, which is the fear response. And so as people are being confronted with this horrifying reality, that I'm seeing a lot of people's response, just the classic fight or flight. You're going to come back and blast the source, crush the person who put that in your face, make you go away that way, destroy it, or you're just going to exit the conversation so that you don't have to be in any way responsible to be a participant. That's what I think it is at a deeper level.
Okay. Michael Alvarez says, I haven't heard Candace say anything that she doesn't back up with hard data. She removes the emotional component and gets down to the hard facts. I'm always open to hearing opinions on all sides. It's hard to argue with facts and data, though. Thank you for putting forth that comment. Michael, I would say I disagree. I don't believe that she removes emotion. In fact, I think that she uses emotion as a source of manipulation because she's saying very emotional things against people of color. I will say this. This is such a charged issue that it has me. Let me put your comment back on the screen. That it even solicits an emotional response from me. I once learned in like a Sunday school lesson that the way that Satan sort of talks to us, the way that he influences us. Satan doesn't tend to whisper something in our ear that wouldn't catch our attention or is outrageous, right? Like when Satan talks to me and he wants to distract me from a positive goal that I have, he doesn't say to me, Candy, you're a 500-pound Chinese man. Because if he said that, I would never believe that. But if he says to me, oh, Candy, you're not strong enough to do it. You're not smart enough. You're a Black woman. You might have this limitation. People won't like you. People will have, what master manipulators do is they do take a grain of truth. And we're going to talk about that because I would like to dig further into some of the things that Candace says, if we can find anything that people of her own race actually agree with. Much of what she says is alienating, but what master manipulators often do is they take a grain of truth and then they surround it by a web of lies and manipulation. So let me tell you why, let me back up with some data, why I say what Candace is saying isn't true. And in the meantime, I will share again my screen and some tweets that she wrote. So I'm still new to this technology and figuring out, but can everybody see my screen yet? Oh no, not yet, you can't. Hold on.
While you're doing that, Candy, can I jump in for a second?
Please.
You had asked the question, why is there such a proactive seeming effort in the church specifically?
Yeah.
I know not all of the people participating tonight are maybe members of the church, but I just want to address that question in that context. You know, I'm a huge Book of Mormon fan. Haven't missed a day reading in forever. I've read it 70 times. I love the book. It is, you know, it's the book that brings you closer to Christ than anything else that you can read. And one of the themes or the messages that I get out of reading it is that most of the time, the members of the Church of Christ, the actual members of the church, get it wrong. Now, I'm not trying to blow the place up. I'm not trying to offend anybody here. But if you look at the scriptures, you look at the Old Testament, you look at the New Testament, you look at all the peoples that are talked about in the Book of Mormon, the Jaredites, the Nephites, everybody that were members of the Church of Christ that had the gospel at one point or another, most of the time they got it wrong. And when they did get it right, it seems like they didn't stay on the right path for very long. They were so quick to turn away from the Lord, to ignore the prophets, to ignore the signs, to ignore all the things that they had revealed to them. So why would the members of the church in 2020, when we've been so blessed with so many things, our lives are pretty easy compared to historical things, why would the members of the church today be any different than they have been throughout time? Most of the time, it just seems like we get it wrong. So that, to me, kind of directly answers the question of why is there such an active, such a proactive effort to try to discredit the concept of just having compassion towards people of color, in particular Black people of color. And obviously there's a stigma in our church, let's just be honest, with Blacks in our church because of things that we're probably not going to get into tonight. But that's just how I see it. I think members of the church don't get it right that often as a people.
Yeah, let me add to that, Patrick. I appreciate your comments. And this kind of picks up to something a question you asked about earlier, Candy. And one of the things we have to keep in mind is that anybody who is a part of any church or any religion or any organization that is designed to help build that individual from the inside, that's what they're there for. So we can't assume just because someone's in church, they're perfect or they've nailed it. But I like to look at everybody within not only the LDS church, but any other church as spiritually sick, and they've checked themselves in so they can get the treatment that they need to get there. And so the opportunity is ours and everyone who will have it to, when they see somebody exercising or raising their hand saying through their behavior or through their words that I have some challenges that I need help with, that we would have the Christ-like love to actually go and lend that service.
I thank you. I appreciate that, Marvin. I'm trying to learn from you, Patrick, and Josh, that Christ-like love, because the three of you have very strong testimonies and very strong levels of patience, I think. And so there's a lot that I can learn from you regarding that. But to Michael's question, let's go back to that. You say she removes the emotional component and gets down to the facts. Let me share my screen with you again, and let's look at her Twitter rants that have come under fire. So I think everybody watching is probably familiar, but if not, Ahmaud Arbery was a 25-year-old Black man who was on a jog when he was cornered. He was unarmed by two white men, a father and son team. The father was a former member of the police department, and a third witness was later arrested as well. All three have been arrested and charged with murder after protests broke out. Anyway, in response to that, Candace Owens says Ahmaud Arbery was caught on camera breaking into an unfinished property that was owned by Larry English. His mother has confirmed it's him in the video. Please stop with the just a jogger BS narrative. Avid joggers don't wear khaki shorts and stop to break into homes. Then she says, oh, that's another diss to LeBron James. We can come back to things that she says about other prominent Black people that are also pretty off-putting things that she said. She said terrible things about Maxine Waters, LeBron James, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry. She has a lot to say that's negative, but she's very, very positive when she speaks in defense of Trump, for instance. She also talks about Black America celebrating and protesting about the deaths of people, again, she calls criminals, but not making any protests about Black on Black crime, which actually isn't true. And I want to come back to the point of conflating, because this is a big talking point in the political arena and elsewhere, that Black people will go out and march about Black Lives Matter. I just realized I'm not on camera. Here, let me just go through all of these. We'll march about Black Lives Matter, and we'll march about Black people being killed in police custody, but not about Black people being killed by other Black people. So let's go back to that. One Black conservative wrote in response to her Twitter rant, "Why is she so hateful? This seriously scares me. This is not how we grow our movement. I pray that God heals her heart and they'll know we are Christians by our love." Very disturbing to see this from a woman who could be such a powerful voice. Another said, "Why are we putting Ahmaud Arbery on trial, criminal history or not? My faith compels me to believe in the idea of redemption." So does ours in the LDS Church, by the way. He did not deserve to die the way that he did. No human being does, full stop. And so Black conservatives came out en masse criticizing Candace Owens's response to a lot of these murders. Also, to your point, Michael, that she shares facts. So in our last conversation, I went down a ton of different information about systemic racism and why I believe, as do many other people, that it is still alive and well. I'm going to share just a few of those, and then we'll come back and we'll talk more about the facts that Candace Owens shares. So when we talk about systemic racism, and let's first define that as well. Does anyone want to chime in on this? Systemic racism, the difference between racism and systemic racism? Anyone? If not, then I will, and just say that systemic racism means institutionalized racism. It means racism that can be felt in all different segments of society, from the educational system to the prison system to the banking system to the housing market and everywhere in between. Many people in this current racial climate are trying to say that systemic racism is a thing of the past. But to that I say, over the past 60 years, regardless of the economy, the Black unemployment rate has consistently been twice that of the white unemployment rate. Black college graduates are twice as likely to be unemployed as all other races who are college graduates. A famous study showed that job applicants with white-sounding names get called back 50% more of the time than applicants with Black-sounding names, even when they have identical resumes. In 2018, the average Black worker earned just 62% of what the average white worker made in this country. While there are about 6 times as many white Americans as Black Americans, the aggregate wealth held by white Americans is 17 times higher than the aggregate wealth held by Black Americans. When we talk about education, as early as preschool, race disparities can be observed. Black children constitute 18% of preschoolers nationwide, but make up 50% of all suspensions. When all age groups are examined, Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students, even for similar infractions. Black students represent 16% of overall enrollment and 27% of students referred to law enforcement. Once Black children are in the criminal justice system, they're 18 times more likely than white children to be sentenced as adults. Let's talk about the prison population really quickly. The United States is almost 5% of the world's population, yet we are 25%. We have rather 25% of the world's prison population. The prison population has gone up 700% since, I believe, 1980. Blacks make up 13% of the population in this country and represent about 40% of the prison population. Once arrested, Black people are convicted more often than white people for the same crimes and are about 20% more likely to be sentenced to jail time than are white people who are arrested. And they typically see 20% longer sentences for those crimes than white people who are convicted of similar crimes. So there's a lot. I spent a lot of time with this on the last show. There are a ton of facts, as you brought up, Michael Alvarez, that could be talked about for a long time. There are disparities that have been observed in the housing market. Currently, Black home ownership is at an all-time low, with 42% of Blacks owning homes as compared to 72% of whites. And even in healthcare, a 2012 study confirmed that 67% of doctors surveyed admitted that they have an unconscious racial bias against Blacks. According to the CDC, Black mothers in the US die at 3 to 4 times the rate of white mothers in childbirth. Put another way, a Black woman is 22% more likely to die from heart disease than white women. So now we're talking about health rates as they affect race overall. 71% more likely to die of cervical cancer and 243% more likely to die from pregnancy or childbirth related causes. So when someone like Candace Owens says, and she talks about the fact that more Black people commit crimes, a frustration that I have is that she is not talking about all the nuance that goes into the convictions that she's referring to. She's not talking about how Black people are disproportionately killed in police custody compared to white people. She's not talking about the unarmed white people who are killed, the percentage of them who are classified as cases that are suicide by cop, for instance. So in other words, she's not talking about the mitigating factors, the instigating factors that lead to police death. Police killing and death of people. It's one thing if you are killed while in police custody or in the commission of a crime and you were shooting out a movie theater or a store, or you're actively threatening police with a gun or another deadly weapon. And it's another if you are like a George Floyd, or Ahmaud Arbery was killed by citizens, not police, a former police officer, not an active police officer. But there's so much nuance and complexity, and the history of systemic racism in this country really has to be taken into account. And that's something that I think that she fails at, and she's highly insensitive to. And I think that she also seems to have a penchant for wanting to speak really poorly about Black people in general, from those who are in the highest ranks of American society, like long-term Congresswoman Maxine Waters, to people very accomplished in the sports world like LeBron James, to Princess Meghan Markle, who she called a witch. And Maxine Waters, she says, is low IQ. She says really, really divisive and ugly things. So I think it's quite unfair to say that she is fact-based in her narrative and that she's non-emotional. I would say she's anything but.
Can I add something to your statistics there, Candy? I like Brandy's comment here. She says, black on black crime is a myth. It's equivalent to white on white crime, which is never labeled as a thing. I had sent you a little earlier a PDF study or a study that's on a PDF file that basically says that 50% of violent crimes committed against white people are committed by white perpetrators. And about 63% of violent crimes committed against black people are committed by black perpetrators. So those numbers are very similar, 57, 63%. To me, all that means is that we're still a very segregated country as far as where people live. And you're a lot more likely to commit a violent crime in particular against people that live near you and therefore look like you. And so that's all those numbers mean. You hear all these black on black crimes, but you never hear the white on white crimes when the numbers are actually very similar. And to me, it's just a factor of geography. People don't go into communities that they're unfamiliar with. They don't drive across town and go into places they're not familiar with, that they don't know the neighborhoods, and commit crimes and then come back. That's less common than just committing crimes in your own neighborhoods.
Yes.
So, one more thing, if it's all right. Why it's true though that there is a high percentage of black crimes within the black community, and so why can't we have two conversations at the same time? Why can't we say, okay, well, we need to address this, but we also need to address this issue of black people disproportionately being killed by police, or like you were saying, also disproportionately approached by police, arrested by police, overcharged by police, and prosecutors over-sentenced, and so on and so forth. So we can have two different conversations at the same time. We can say, okay, yeah, there's some issues in the black community, 63% of crimes, we need to do something about that. Well, at the same time, we can also say, hey, there's also some things that are baked into the cake in this country as far as the way the police handle things that we need to address as well.
Yeah, but the time to bring that other issue up is not when a man has just died in the street at the hands of police officers. So I 100% support what you're saying. And just picking up, Candy, on what you were talking about earlier, about her criticizing others, I find that, people criticize others for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're struggling with their own self-esteem. And number two, they're motivated by something, by views, by money, by power, or something. So, Candace is doing a lot of that. And part of, I think it was Michael's question that came up, and the systemic nature of racism that you're talking about. Let's just take two issues. Number one, the Fifth Amendment, the 13th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment, and the Civil Rights Act of 1866. By the way, which President Andrew Johnson tried to veto twice, and Congress was still able to get it through. So you see the fight even for equality. We're fighting for equality just to establish the laws there. But in an 1883 very pivotal decision by the Supreme Court with 5 cases that came before it, they were going to do one of two things. They were either going to right the wrongs and make sure we move forward with equality on those cases that were brought forth, or we were going to write into law the ability to exercise the same racism, the systemic racism within law, which they did. That's what they voted. They voted against. They said they did not have Congress did not give them the ability to decide on this, and so for another 102 years, we had systemic racism built into law, federal and state. And one of the things that Candace talks about, she just doesn't go far enough, but it shows it. She talks about the fatherlessness in homes, the lack of African-American fathers in homes. She will go and say that is a design of welfare. So welfare incentivizes African Americans not to have the father in the home. We'll give you money if the father is not in the home. So here you have an actual, example of this systemic racism where they're going to pay money to those mothers to make sure the fathers are not in the home. Now, where did all this come from? That's part of the systemic racism that, originated from that 1883 decision. And so she just doesn't go far enough. But anything that she says, I absolutely love it, because we can take that and go far enough and show exactly where the problem originates. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add on that.
I'm glad that you are able to kind of seek the silver lining in things that people say, even those that can be received as harsh. or divisive or undermining. For me, it's frustrating because I've heard it spoken in certain arenas, like in different Black justice groups and that sort of a thing that I'm a part of. I hear people talking about how they feel that someone like Candace Owens, and she's not the only one, but she's probably the most known one at this time, that she plays to the ideals of white racists. So how do we solve that problem? How can we come to solutions? I love that you're bringing into focus the historic context of how much of this systemized racism came to be, and how and why this is so inciting. Many people like myself didn't think George Floyd was a hero, but thought he was a symbol, for instance, of lynchings that went on and happened to thousands of people in this country that went unpunished. And the lynching started after the Civil War, after slavery was ended, lynchings, and then Jim Crow, and what you just brought up, so many things that kept Black people from being integrated into society. I think this rhetoric can be dangerous if unchallenged on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think that things that spawn discussion are also good too, especially if we as Christian people, as conscious people, as spiritually connected people are willing to talk about them and with an open heart. But what do you say, Marvin, to the criticism that this type of rhetoric is really fuel for racism?
Okay, so you know me, everybody's thought, every thought is important, every voice is important. So I don't care what the thought is, I realize it's important to us as humanity. And so the first thing I say, if Candace Owens wasn't talking, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I am grateful that she's out there doing what she's doing, because it gives us a chance to have this conversation. Also, she's given us exactly what we need to study. She's given us the topics to go study and research. I mean, so this couldn't be easier for us. And also, if you are going, she is so articulate and so intelligent and so well prepared on the things she's saying over and over again. You know, I saw her talking about climate change and it was a complete mess. I saw her talking about immigration and it was a complete mess. You know, she had no compassion for children being separated at the border. But these other things,
immigration.
She's talking about these things over and over and over again. If you're going to go and debate with Candace Owens, you had better be prepared. And so I say, why not be just as prepared for the people in your communities, in your wards, in your workplaces, and everywhere else? This is an opportunity for us to get prepared, and she's given us the platform, she's given us the venue, she's given us the topics to study and everything else. So I applaud her.
Okay, I really appreciate your perspective, Marvin, in saying that she's arming us with a defense that we as people need to be armed with. So I kind of like that perspective, because I always want to end these conversations with thoughts on where do we go from here? Like, how do we solve this problem? So I kind of like what you're suggesting, that we arm ourselves with this information, and with people who use divisive rhetoric, people who are wanting to use inclusive rhetoric, we can use that to sort of shore up our mission, that she can help us know. She shines a light on what the problem is, and she says things that other people are thinking and are afraid to say. I do think that's why she's so beloved by the white community, and you'd be hard pressed to find Black Americans who like her, who support her. I have never met anyone, but I'm positive someone exists. I just haven't met them, but I know that there has to be someone who agrees with what she's saying. I will say this language is so caustic that I don't see how she's furthering her cause. And I think Patrick brought up that and you might have said earlier, Marvin, as well, that we need to be able to have conversations and let those be separate conversations. Like this concept, this notion of Black on Black crime. Nobody talks about white on white crime. And thanks for the statistics you gave, Patrick. I also think I've read that 83% of overall crime committed against whites is committed by white people. But that's not even a thing, white on white crime.
Right.
So I do want to say that I think that as conscious, responsible people who want to bring about change, we need to stop conflating conversations of police injustice or of societal injustice by those who are in power against those who are not with crimes committed by criminals. It really is bothersome to me when people want to compare the acts of criminals, drug dealers, murderers, rapists, when they compare that to the acts of police, people who are supported, funded by taxpayer dollars, who are trained by society to protect and serve, and we want to compare what they're doing, somebody in authority, to somebody who's a criminal. And I also will say to Michael Alvarez's point again, that what she's saying is actually not true. There are lots of rallies and protests in the Black community about Black on Black crime, about crime against community members. There have been rallies and marches from Newark, New Jersey to Gary, Indiana. They have happened in Los Angeles. I've read about them all weekend. There absolutely are rallies, there are community networks, there are churches and other organizations working to address the issues of crime and poverty. But I don't think you can she talks about these things in such a superficial way, very surface. And I don't think you can talk about crime without talking about the underlying issues that lead to crime. And so you can't heal a disease by only treating symptoms without looking at the root cause. And there's so much more complexity that's involved. Poverty.
Yeah.
Please.
Andy, can I just jump in and make a couple points? So just more of the misdirection, the sleight of hand that is part of the narrative. When you draw attention in a case like George Floyd to the Black on Black crime, it's apples and oranges, and you can't really make that comparison. There is no duty of care. There is no power that's been bestowed that needs to be honored and respected when you're talking about white on white crime or Black on Black crime. But when you're talking about police brutality, there is a duty of care. These people are in a position of power. They have lethal force available, and it's being misused. And so by quickly changing the narrative to Black on Black crime, it's just a misdirection. Also, one thing that she said is she gave a slightly sarcastic quote. She said, he's being uplifted as an amazing human being. And again, I feel like that's a little bit of a distraction because obviously he had some flaws. He had made some mistakes in his life. But what he should be is he should be lifted up and celebrated as a human being. And on that level, what can you say? So it's just a sleight of hand. It's looking in a different direction to find a different problem to distract from the things at hand. And so I'm seeing that. Also, what I just want to point out, what I'm seeing here is she has an opinion. She certainly deserves to be heard, as does everybody. But I'd like the viewers to take note that here are 3 other people who disagree. They have personal life experiences that don't align with what Candace Owens is saying. And I think that's a part that's being lost on a lot of people, people like me, that you can't just run out and grab a single data point that lines up with your opinion or your belief or what you'd like to hear. That's not fair. That's like doing some sort of scientific study and including terrible outlier data, which you can't do. And anybody who has any background in statistics knows that you have to be cautious to not include stuff that's so different from the rest that it takes away from the true meaning of the situation. So I encourage people to broaden your news sources, look for people beyond Candace Owens. And when you're talking to someone who's having personal experiences, take it seriously. Like, give it a chance. Open your heart and listen to what they're saying about what they're experiencing in their life, and not think about what clip you can pull from YouTube to tell them why that's not true.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're just about out of time. I don't know if anybody else wants to say something on this topic. There's so much that can be said. But
just to echo what a couple of you were saying, we just need to have simultaneous conversations. Sure, if there's an issue with not enough Black fathers in the home, that's an issue that should be addressed. If there's an issue with crimes in the Black community, which probably are highly related to poverty and education, then those are issues that need to be addressed also. But that doesn't mean that we can't simultaneously address the issue of the misuse of force by police officers. There's just no reason why we can't talk about all of it at the same time.
Thank you. I agree. Marvin, do you have anything you'd like to leave our listeners with in closing?
Something I've enjoyed this conversation. It's been a great discussion. And the only thing that I'd say is have ears and an open heart to listen to every voice, because every voice is important out there. But don't just be interested in sound bites. Go further, research it, challenge the thoughts, get a little deeper, and err on the side of compassion.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Josh, did you say your final remarks, or do you want to, before I close out with a poem?
Well, to get to your poem quickly, but I will say that, you know, we live in an interesting time. The information age, the landscape of information has completely changed to what it was a couple decades ago. There's all sorts of opinions, and there's so much information out there. It does take a little bit of work to sift through some of it. But if your heart's in the right place and you're willing to do a little work, you can get through a lot of the garbage that's out there, and you can find things that matter, and you can, you know, hopefully make the world a little bit better by being compassionate, like Marvin said. So it's worth the effort. It's not easy sometimes, but it's absolutely worth it, because, you know, these are our brothers and sisters. If you're Christian, you know, these are our brothers and sisters in Christ that we're talking about. So that matters.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do want to say in closing a few things. First of all, thank you to our family, our church family, and our human family from around the world who is joining us for these discussions. Thank you to people who have commented during this broadcast. You've made it really interesting, and we appreciate your feedback and your support and your perspective. I like that Michael Alvarez brought up that comment and the question about the veracity of data that someone like Candace Owens shares. And I like what Marvin had to say, that when people are sharing this information, it gives the rest of us an opportunity to know to separate fact from fiction, and to know what we need to arm ourselves against, and maybe even a call to arms to be better in our communities, and to be more conscientious, more family oriented, more ready to fight the good fight. A common misconception, and I don't know, tonight we made it an hour. Last time it was an hour and a half. We might go back to a longer format. I'm not sure, because there's so much to talk about. But I didn't want to leave without saying there is a misconception that Candace Owens commonly speaks about, and that is that if you're Black in America and you just are compliant to the law, then you will not be a victim of police harassment. I personally have been. I am not a criminal. I have never been charged with any crime. I have been pulled over for speeding. I am a speeder. I am guilty of that, but I am not in any way, I'm not the usual suspect. I'm not threatening in any way. And I'm so passionate about this issue because I know if someone like me can be profiled and mistreated and forced out of the car by police and impounded and left on the sidewalk crying to fend for myself, and that can happen to me as a 19-year-old college student, non-criminal, if it can happen to the only Black member of the Senate, the only Black, Republican member of the Senate, if he could be stopped 7 times in 1 year by police wrongfully, if he can be stopped on his way into the Senate, please rethink this narrative when you're sharing it. And I see it on social media all the time. I see people saying, if you just follow the police, if you just don't resist arrest, then you won't have a problem. I wish that were the case. I wish it were as simple as that. I've never been arrested, but I've certainly been pulled over, and so have many, many people I know, and profiled and harassed unjustifiably. And we're just trying to get to the bottom of what can make this country a safer and more just place for everyone. And in closing, I will say one of my all-time favorite poets, activists, artists, Maya Angelou, who was a woman who was the pinnacle of wisdom and grace in the face of adversity and grace under pressure, wrote a poem that really resonates with my soul. I hope you'll like it too. Many of you are familiar with it, but maybe a lot of you will be hearing it for the first time, and it is called Still I Rise. So I wish you all good night and send love and gratitude from the bottom of my heart for all of you being here with us, and to the panel, Josh, Marvin, and Patrick, thank you so much. To our panelists last week, Laura and James, we love you too, we miss you. And to all of you, thank you for joining us. Let us know if you want to take part in the discussion. We love to hear your voices. And with that, I will give you Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise. I rise, I rise. Brothers and sisters, together we rise. Thank you for joining us. Love to you. Good night. Oh, and thank you, Nicole. Bye-bye.